Hey guys, it's Kyle. I just thought to make a video sort of going over building a Python API from scratch. And what I'll be going over is having no Python, no tools, no project installed, and going step by step. We'll create every file, explain what it does, and commit as we go, push it to GitHub, and set automated testing. So just to go over, I'll provide these in Discord, but how to install UV for your system. If you want to install Zed to follow along, you can. It's up to you. Postman for testing queries for the server. GitHub CLI if you don't have GitHub. And then Docker, lastly. Now, first thing is we got to install UV. Now, to give a little information, UV is a package manager and it handles installing Python, creating virtual environments, and installing packages in one tool. Without it, you'd have to install Python separately. You'd have to do so many things like making text documents to try and install different Python packages. It would add so many extra steps that you can pretty much skip. So what I'm going to do, at least on Windows, is open up Windows PowerShell. I'm going to run it as an administrator. My screen might go blank for a sec because I'm basically verifying that I'm an administrator. I'm going to paste the command from the documentation. What it's going to do is it's going to basically install UV for me. Oops. There we go. So now UV is already installed. That's it. Now to double check, I'm just going to do UV -- version. Now, usually what would happen is, like in a tutorial, they'll tell you, oh, Python download or go to python.org and then download it here, but we don't have to do that. Now, the next step is that we are going to install Python. So UV Python install 3.12, just in case, UV space Python space install space 3.12. Now, when I install this, there we go. They already said it was installed because I must have already installed it. But if you haven't, you can install it. Now, let's just say you do uv run python -- version, and you'll see that I actually have 3.13.5 actually installed. But I'll be using 3.12 for this video, so I'm just going to do uv run -- python. No, uv run, uv/uv python pin 3.12. Now, when this runs, I'm just gonna wait. Now, what this does is when I do /version, now you'll see it actually pins it. What this means is it's gonna limit my Python specifically to 3.12, not going any higher to any other versions because that would cause conflicts on some people's systems. Now, what we're gonna do is basically I'm gonna go into my desktop. I'm going to go to my school projects folder, and I'm just going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this Kyle example repo in this case. And then I'm just going to basically open it up. Now, one of the ways I'm just going to do this is close that. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to open up a terminal by just going into the file explorer, typing in PowerShell to open up another terminal. Next thing I want to do is something called UV init. What this does is basically initializing UV into the project, and you'll see that it created a git ignore, a Python version, a main Python source file, a PyProject, and a README file. Now, I'm going to be using Zed in this case, which is one of my editors. It's really efficient, uses like no memory, and what you do is just download it for your specific system and then continue from here. Now, what I'm going to do is if you still have your terminal up, you can do something called ced. What this is doing is going to open up this specific project in the specific folder I'm in. As you can see on the right side, I have my git ignore, my Python version, my main.py, my PyProject, and my README. It might ask you if you want to install some extensions. I would, because it makes it easy to actually read it as an example. Now, one thing I would say is that you'll see this version, 3.13. Now, what I'm going to do is basically say that you can keep this here perfectly fine, because even though we set it to our system, the 3.12, it doesn't matter, is there's something called a Py project. You can think of this as like the brains of where it figures out where to grab files. You'll see that it says requires Python 3.13. This is where we'll actually manage it. So now what we'll do is we'll actually update the information. So I'm going to add a description here. I'm going to say this is an example Python project we're pushing will run test in any branch. It just sort of gives a explanation of what this project does. Now, what I'm going to do is basically update my Python version to 3.10. Now, what this does is it just makes it easier to basically install dependencies. Now, what I'm going to do is there's a little terminal button in my terminal, at least. I'm going to open this up in my specific project. We're going to need four dependencies in this project. The way that you add a dependency to your current project is something called uv add. Well, the first thing is what we need is something called FastAPI, and what we'll do is click install. What it's going to do is basically install that dependency for the specific project I'm going to need. I'm also going to add something called httpx. I'm going to add something called pytest. Lastly, I'm going to install something called uvicorn standard. Oops. It's going to install it, and these are all the four dependencies that you'll need for this specific project. What I'm going to do is basically update this file. I'm going to add something called a tool.pytest.ini underscore options. I'm going to say test paths are going to be test, and it's going to be dot for the current directory. Now, I'll explain what this does. PyProject is the standard config file for Python projects. It replaces the old combination of requirements.txt, a setup.py, and a pytest.ini. Everything lives in one place. What this all means, if I'm going from top to bottom, requires Python. What Python version this specific project will need. UV uses this to pick the right Python version. Dependencies tells the packages we need. FastAPI is the web framework. uvicorn is the server that runs it. HTTPX is needed for testing. PyTest runs our test in our case. Now, what we'll end up doing is we'll keep our main.py here because this is basically the standard example that they gave. Now, what we'll do is something called uv space sync. You'll see what this does is it might have already made it, but it's a .venv file. This it also should create a UV lock, which basically tells everybody what dependencies that we're grabbing for the specific project, making sure everybody has everything. So like if I'm on GitHub and I'm cloning this project, it will be able to grab the exact dependencies that the last person who was making commits would be able to run this project. Now, what we're actually going to do is initialize GitHub. Now, one of my suggestions is to download GitHub for Windows, cli.github.com. Now, what this does is it makes it really easy to be able to do GitHub commands. It may ask you to log in, which should be gh space auth space login. Once you're logged in, you can continue, or if you already have Git, that's perfectly fine. Now, I'm going to do git space init, where it reinitializes my existing project. Now, some of the things I would say is that you'll see if I close the env file, this git ignore file. These are files that GitHub will ignore when we're trying to commit our project. The reason why is the virtual environment is specific for your system. You wouldn't want that to be public. Well, you wouldn't want this to be public on the repository that we'll make. The reason why is because not everybody's system uses the same files, and the fact is it can be a lot of bloat in this case. Now, what I'm going to do is do git space status. You'll see that it actually added some untracked files in our case. The gitignore, Python version, readme, main.py, pyproject, and uvlock. So I'm going to do is git add dot. What this means is it'll add all these untracked files. if you're someone that wants to group these, you can. I'm just going to add them all at once. Now what I'm going to do is git commit -m and then 2 hashtags. I'm going to say init project with uv. Now this is just going to set up the first commit for our project. Now next thing is we're going to make the base of the API in this case. Now what we're going to do is call it from FastAPI import FastAPI. Now you'll see that it actually says it couldn't be resolved, and you'll see that it's imported but it's unused in our case, which is perfectly fine. Now again, just to make sure, what we'll basically do from here is do something called app. We're gonna be creating a app, and we're gonna be importing this fast API. But you may say, why is this bringing up this error? Now, the reason why I would say, if you do get this, is that we're going to go to our settings. We are going to look for interpreter, or let's see, where would it be? This is the specific problem I always hate finding. Alright guys, continuing from here, I did realize I had to pause the recording. Whether it should fix it is just by reopening Zed. I wasn't too sure why it wasn't working, so I'm just going to open up my project again, and you'll see that it's still broken. Huh. Alright guys, for the last time, I think I fixed it. So what the issue is that if you're running Zed, VS Code should be able to do it automatically, but at the bottom it should say select virtual environment. What happened is you had to select the right one. It was mistakenly doing the wrong setup. You can add virtual environment and look for the specific folder for the .env. If you don't run into this issue, it could have been just me, but you'll want to add it and make sure that it disappears that error, because it should be able to find it as shown. Because as I hover, it should show type safety, meaning it should be able to show me the recommendations or that it has the dependencies. So continuing last, we're going to be now creating the API in our case. So we are going to say that I'm going to want to have 3 routes. Now I'm going to do app.get. I'm going to say this is going to be the default route, so read.root. And I'm going to say it's going to return a message of hello world. Next thing is I'm going to copy this as a base. We have 3 different routes in this case. We're going to also have a health check, and we're going to make this a health, and then what it's going to return is a status, and we're going to say when it is healthy, it's going to return the word healthy. Lastly, let's make a dynamic route. What just means is let's just say we make a add function where it's going to add 2 numbers together, which I'm going to say is A, and then secondly, it's going to be B in this case. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to add underscore numbers, and I'm going to say that A is a int, and that B is a int, and then we are going to return the result of A plus B in this case. Now, you'll see that this has an error. It's because I mistakenly added an F, but it should look like this as our file. So just to give you an explanation, this just returns a welcome message. This returns a message that says as a health check. A lot of services have this type of thing, but it's not just a word. Usually we hit a service. We usually have this where it's like a load balancer where multiple servers are pinging this in production to make sure our server is actually running. Lastly, this is just a function sort of for a test later that I'm thinking of having, where we're adding two different numbers. And what this does is this hint basically tells FastAPI validate input automatically. So if someone tries parsing a string, it returns an error without us having to ever write any validation logic. Now, what I'm going to do is do git status. Oh, you might see a .z. You can ignore that. That's no longer needed. Now, what we're going to do is git status. There's also a py-write config, which we can just perfectly leave perfectly fine. I'm going to do git add again. I'm going to do git commit, and I'm going to say add FastAPI with 3 endpoints in this case. Now, before you commit, usually you'd want to run it, but I thought it would run, but let's just make sure. Run uvicorn, which is our server that we're using, main app -- reload. Now you'll see that it says it started up the server, right? Now, what this does is uv runs inside the virtual environment without activating it. Main : or semicolon app in main py, use the app object is basically what it's saying. Because if I open this up, app is the app object in this case to use. Main is the file path. Reload means it auto restarts when I make changes. So just say I made hot world. You'll see it automatically restarts the file, the whole entire server for me. I'll change this back, and it restarts it again. And you'll see that it started up the server originally at port 127, my local port. I can open us up in the browser, and you'll see it says hello world. Oops, let's do hello world. I update it, restart it, refresh, and you'll see it updated in real time. Now, what the thing is, let's test this with Postman. This is the next thing I would want you guys to download. Postman is basically a really easy way to test endpoints, which we'll need later when we build this project. So you click download, and what will happen is you can sign up without an account. You can skip without making an account, launch up this program, and what we'll do is we'll test these 3 different endpoints to make sure we can hit them. So I'll remove this. So we're going to do a get request. There's other ones. We're going to focus on doing get requests because these are all get requests in this case. Now, so what we're going to do is pass in this URL up here, because this is the URL that we're going to define it, and we're going to do /, and that's it for this first URL. I'm going to click send. You see it returns hello world. So if we try changing this again, you'll see it restarts the server. I hit this again, it updates it. Now, reload just makes it really easy in the dev environment to test. Now, let's check that health method by doing /. Well, we already have a /, but health. I can click send, and you'll see it returns healthy. Now, I can also do this in the browser, at least for this server. So I can check the status. And then lastly, I'm going to check the add function. So what we're going to do is something called add hello3. So this should, in theory, hit the validation and show there's an error. Yep. So I'll make this a little bit bigger, and you'll see that it says int parsing. Input should be a valid integer. Unable to parse string as an integer. This is some of the benefits with FastAPI because it has validations. And if you guys want, you can hover over the integer in this case, and you'll see it source says convert a number or string to an integer, or return 0 if no arguments are given in this case. But this is the benefit of FastAPI. So it said, oh, this was not an integer. I'm going to fail it. So I'm going to do 4/3. This should mean, yep, it updated the result to 7 in this case. Now, let's just say we want to try a route that shouldn't exist. Like, let's just say I try to do subtract /5/3, which we don't actually have. You'll see that it said it's not found because it automatically knows and it sort of determines, oh, no other route actually exists. That's until maybe we're like, okay, you know what? Let's add a subtract route in this case. So I'm going to do subtract. It's going to be the same sort of benefit, subtract numbers, and we're going to say it's a minus b in this case. I'm going to save, so it restarts it. I'm going to run this again, and you'll see it returns 2. So that's how easy it is to sort of go Postman, test it all together. I'm going to run this again, go back to what I had, and you'll see not found again. Now, at any point you want to test a different query, you can just click on it, and it will basically run it, and you'll see that it works perfectly fine because this is a history. Now, one of the things I would say is FastAPI also generates something called docs, documentation that helps you out. So if I go to our server 127, which is basically your local host, and do /doc, FastAPI generates a virtualization where you can test different inputs, and it will say what it expected as a input. So that's the regular route. This is the add route where it says it takes A and B, with both are integers. It tells you if there's an error, if there's a validation error, and if it was successful. I'm gonna click try it out, and you'll see that it allows me to enter two variables. I'm gonna say 5 and 3. Click execute. Now you see I scroll down, it says 8 in this case, and you'll see it actually added it. I actually accidentally ran it twice, but it added it. All right, now some of the things are, we're gonna now add tests, because now that we know the server run, we can add tests to make sure that it all works. It's saying that, oh, I guess I have an update for the file. It's probably this white space right here, but I'll double check. Nope, it was not, but I'll just basically git add, git commit, and what did I do the last one is? Update me-by for fast API. Commit that. Now if I do git static, it should be all good. Not on branch master. Oops, didn't mean to open that. All right, so I'm gonna close that terminal. Now, the next thing what we're gonna do is clear my terminal. I'm going to make a test file now. So we're gonna start with test underscore me.py. Usually you want to do test underscore and just copy the file name in front. So we have main.py, so it's gonna be a test underscore main.py. So FastAPI actually has a way to test this for us. So I'm gonna do from FastAPI, grab it, and you'll see it gives a lot of different suggestions from different imports that we may want. So I'm gonna say I want to be using the test client, and I'm going to import the test client. It's gonna show like a little squiggly line because it's not actually imported. Now we're gonna say from our main application, because with all types of, we can basically access our entire project and test against it here. We're gonna say we're gonna import our app that we have, our API. I'm going to make a client so we can test against it. In this case, I'm going to pass in our app, and then I'm gonna do 3 different tests because we have 3 different endpoints. Usually I would say you'd want to have at least 1 test per endpoint, but you may have more in case you have other tests that you want to do. Maybe validation, you want to make sure it fails. You can have as many tests that you think you need to cover for each situation. So I'm going to say test underscore read root in this case. I'm going to say we are going to grab that response, and we are going to say we are going to get for when the client actually goes to that route. And what we're going to do is assert that the response, that status underscore code is 200. That means that the request was successful. And the next thing is, if you need to check it, is you see that we return message hello world. So I'm going to copy this message just so I don't type it wrong. So we want to make sure it's the same thing. Response.test, assert JSON. Response.json is the message. So you could, in theory, honestly just copy this. So we want to make sure that the JSON is exactly the same thing that we expect. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to then basically copy this because I'm going to make tests for the other 2 things that we have, the health check, and then we're going to also do add numbers. Now we don't copy the parameters for a test in this case, because it's just a method that we're calling. Now what I'm going to do is update this one first. I'm going to say we're going to go with /health because that's what we need to go. It's the same code because we're not checking for errors. We're just checking to make sure that it's successful. And the return that this health method does is status healthy. So I'm going to copy the JSON, And then for the final one, you see that this is a dynamic route. So there's nothing really, you're like, oh, but it's not going to always return the same thing. Well, actually will, because what we're going to do is add /5/3. So in theory, this means that if you need from earlier, we had this result 8 in this case. So I'm going to update this, so it's going to be a result. And what you want to do is basically follow how it outputs. So I don't want to do a string because that's going to error out and basically say it was a fail. I'm going to say it's an integer because JSONs can accept integer strings objects. Now, each test hits an endpoint and checks the status code and response body. Same thing that we did in Postman, but it's all automated, meaning that we don't have to do it individually each time we run the project. So I'm going to be doing uvicorn pytest -v. So the benefit here is that it's spinning up pytest and it's using pytest, and it'll basically say it passed all our 3 tests in our case. So let's just say we expected this to return a 4. I run it. Oops, my client messed up. I run it and you'll see it said full diff 4. It said that it was expected. It actually came out of 8. So it said that the response was 8 and it was trying to compare it to 4, which is not right. So I'm going to change this back to 8. And I'm going to run it, and you say all passes. Now, what if I change this code to a different static code? It's going to basically say the same thing. It's going to fail because our first assert didn't pass in this case. Now, we can do, now that we know our test work, we can do git status. We're going to do git add. And if you do want to do the integer file, test_.main.py, we're going to now add a commit message, basically what message to show to the user, like what was the big thing that we changed for this file. We're going to say add test for all endpoints in this case. Git status. Now, what I'm going to do is I basically want to set up a repo in this case. Now, if you've installed the GitHub client, this makes it really easy, but I'll show you in 2 different ways. So the first way is that if you go to GitHub, I'm going to go to our organization. The easiest way to go to our organization is go to our top right, go to our organizations, and look for Are You Trading in this case. Or you can go to your profile, whatever you prefer. I would suggest doing it here, just so if you run into issues, I can help you out. You can go into New Repository, and you're going to type the repository. So what I would do is the same file path that we did. So Kyle-example.repo. So when you generate this, you're going to click Create Repo. Make sure that there's no, and you're also going to make it public. You're going to have no README, no gignore, and no license, because we already have a gignore. We want to grab what we have in the project. Now, when you click Create New, you would create and grab this, and what you would do is git space remote add origin. I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to add a dot git. What this means is it's basically going to tell GitHub that our project is located at this directory. Oops. One issue, you need to have github.com/areyoutrading // So this just tells you, okay, it's at this specific project, but it's not at the moment because we don't have a repo there. If you do it that way, then you do git branch -m main, because that's where we want to push it in this case. Now, the fact that we don't have a repo, I'm going to use the client. So I'm going to do GitHub repo create Are You Trading, because that's the organization, and I'm going to say Kyle example repo --public source dot push. What this do is it's going to basically create the project for me, and what I'm going to do is that if I did try to create this, it would fail. So I'm just going to go back to the organization, and you'll see Kyle example repo just updated now, and it has our commits that we did earlier, adding the test, updating the main.py, adding the 3 endpoints, and initializing the project. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is sort of explain what actions are in this case. You'll see that there's ways to build, test, and deploy your code, make code reviews. There's so many things that this is. Now, what happens is we want to make these tests. So yeah, sure, I can do all these tests perfectly fine. Like doing this, like before I push any code, I'll run these tests. Now the problem is that we want these tests to run automatically every time we push. That's what the point of GitHub Actions are. GitHub Actions is a CI, or it's a service that's built into GitHub. So when we push code, GitHub will spin up a brand new machine, a virtual machine, installs our project, runs our tests, and tells you if they basically pass or not. Green check mark if they're good, or a red X if something broke. So what we're going to do is we are going to make the directory. So we're going to do new file, and actually no, we need to do a folder .github, and we are going to do a new folder inside of this, which is called workflows. In this case, it has to be exactly this. We're going to then right click, make sure you're on the workflows file folder. You're going to do new file, and we're going to do something called test.yml. This is our test action that we're going to do. Now, let's break this down piece by piece. So we need to have a name of this action that'll basically show it up on GitHub. We can call it whatever we want. I'm going to name it a test because maybe we'll have more tests later on. And what we're going to say is that we need a trigger. When should this workflow run? So we're going to have one, and we're going to say push. What this means is push means every time anyone pushes to any branch. And we're also going to say pull request. It's going to give you suggestions if you said, oops, I need my quotations around it. So because we're going to say it's a right for either of them. Pull request means when someone opens up or updates a PR. Now, we can also do things like specifying the branch. We can also do we can do lots of different options, but we just want to do it on every branch in this case, not a specific branch. Now, you'll see, yes, it's because it's missing jobs. Yes, that's the next thing I'm going to go over. So jobs. A workflow has one or more jobs. Each job runs its own virtual machine. We only have one job, and we'll call it test in this case. So we're going to do job, test. And you could have multiple jobs. Maybe you want to test it. Maybe you want to deploy it. And they run it in parallel in this case. Like they'll run at the same time. Now, the next step is that we need to specify what it runs on, the type of machine. Now, by default, I would just say we're going to run it on Ubuntu. It all depends on what your tests actually do. Maybe I'm running a Java program. Maybe I don't want to run it on Ubuntu. I'm going to run it on Ubuntu latest. I'm going to now say that. Now, actually, I'll explain a little bit more. What runs on GitHub gives you free virtual machines. Ubuntu latest is the most common. You could also use like Windows latest or Mac OS latest. The VM is completely fresh every time, nothing left from previous runs. So like when you do this and it spins it up, it won't know anything about the last thing because it spins it up every single time, brand new. Now, even though we have a test, it only makes the virtual machine. It doesn't have any steps, which is the next thing. Now, what these steps are going to do is we need it to first use three things. In this case, we're going to say that we need it to use or uses action/checkout at before. This clones your repository onto the virtual machine. Without this, the machine is empty. It doesn't have anything on it. Secondly, we need to install UV because that's how we install Python, how we run our tests. Now, the benefit is that UV, the team behind our Astral, have a official action, which makes it really, really easy for us to do this. We'll do astral-sh/setup-uv at v4. Lastly, we want to run these tests. We're going to do run, and we're going to do uv run space pytest/v, exactly what we're doing locally. I'm going to do Control S, and you'll see it formats it so it's all happy. Now, uses means use a pre-built action someone published. Run means run this shell command in this case. Now, if I do git status, you'll see that it made the GitHub folder So what we're going to do is git add dot, we're going to do git commit -m, add GitHub Actions workflow to run test on push. Now I'm going to push this. Now what will happen is if I refresh this page in this case, oops, if I go back here, you'll see it actually started it up already. So I can click on this and you'll see it's queued. So I can open this up and you'll see it's setting up the job. It's running that first action of setting up GitHub. It's running the Astral to set up the Python library. It's gonna run our test, and you'll see when I open up the pytest, it passed all our 3 tests in our case. Now, in a hypothetical scenario, you'll see that, let's just say we did have an error in this case. It will error out, and if it errors out, it'll basically show that it was a failed run. Because when I open this, you'll see there's a check mark. Sometimes there might be an error or there's an X. You'll also see an orange circle, meaning that it's currently running in our case. Now, this isn't needed yet, but I'm thinking that it's good to know. So I'm going to say that for our last thing, we want to be able to run Docker locally on our machine in this case. So you'll download Docker. It may ask you on Windows to set up your hyperthreads in this case if you have it set up. Mac, it shouldn't need to do that. Now, once you have Docker all set up, you want to load it up. So Docker desktop in this case. I'm going to wait for it to load. Oh, I already have it open. Now, I already have containers in this case. We're only going to be really ever focused on containers in this case. There is such stuff as images where it downloads, volumes, basically where it stores content. Kubernetes, we won't really be touching at all. This is basically where we have to start up multiple clusters of different servers at the same time and putting all the resources managed really quickly. And then builds are just when it builds our processes. Now, what I'm going to do is in our project, we're going to make something called a Dockerfile. Now, when we want to deploy, this is what we'll want to run, because while UV handles local development and GitHub Actions handle the content delivery, basically, or continuous integration, by making sure everything runs for our test, we need a Dockerfile for when we actually deploy this. Now, I'll only really show how we can do this locally. So the big thing is line by line, every Docker file starts with from. It's the base image, a pre-built starting point. Think of it like choosing an OS. Now, the OS that we'll be doing specifically this is the benefit of why I said we're using, let me install this extension for Z, so it makes it all pretty, makes it really easy for type safety. Excuse me. We're going to say that we are going to be using Python. There's no colon. It's from, and we're going to do Python, colon, or semicolon, 3.12 Slim. Now, 3.12 Slim is a minimal Linux image with Python already installed. The Slim is basically like a smaller version, where if I don't provide that, it's going to be like around a gigabyte, and it basically cuts out stuff we don't need, like compilers or docs. So it's a really small. There's also other versions, but specifically make sure you have this. Otherwise, I can't guarantee it will work. Now, next thing we need to do is something called copy. Copy puts files in the container. So we're going to say copy, and it'll basically say we want a source. So when I type this out, you'll see it says a source and a destination. Like they have hello text and an absolute path where we want to go. So we want to go from -- from equals the -- from is basically it's a trick. We'll want it to basically grab the UV binary directly from UV's official Docker image instead of us having to install it with curl or pip. It's like really quick and it's really easy to do. So I'm going to do ghcr.io astral-sh/uv semicolon latest, and then we need the path for where it's going to go is uv uvx, and then bin, in this case, the base directory for the virtual machine. Secondly, we need to set a work directory. Now, in this case, it says the working directory inside the container. Every command after this runs from app. like doing cd/app, but permanent. If the folder doesn't exist, Docker will create it. So in our case, we want it to create the app folder. Next, we want to do something called copy. It'll copy files from our machine into the container. And what we'll want to do is copy the dependencies files first and then run them. So we're going to copy the py project.toml, the uv-lock, which I've explained that basically keeps all the versions that we'll want ever synced up with the project, and then dot slash, and then we're going to basically want to have run, basically runs them. Run is a command that executes during the build. So we're going to do run uv sync -- frozen -- no dev. Now, the benefit is that -- frozen uses the UV lock exactly as is. It doesn't try to update any versions because we want to use the same dependencies everywhere. We don't want to use different dependencies in other places. All right, and then no dev basically skips tests like pytest because we don't need them in production, because when we test them right here, when we go to our actions and we know that they're working here, when we actually have a deployment script, it's just going to skip the test because we already ran test. Why do we need to run test twice? Now, secondly, now after that we have this, after we copy it, we need to now copy again. Now, we're going to basically be copying main.py. Now, we copy dependencies separately on code on purpose because Docker caches each step, and they call it a layer. If your code changes but the dependencies don't, Docker will skip this step on rebuilds, and it'll basically save time. Now, we're basically copying the actual application code. This goes after dependencies, so code changes don't trigger a full reinstall. Lastly, we need to run a command. This is what actually runs the container when it starts. It's the default command, same as running like when we ran our application locally, we were running uv run uvicorn main semicolon app space reload. In this case, we won't be having reload because it's not a dev environment. So what we'll do is cmd. Now you'll see this is a little bit weird because we're not going to be doing just strings because you can't do that in this case. We need to do an array. So we're going to be doing uv run uvicorn main app. We're going to also say host, because we're going to want it to start up on the machine that it starts at, and at the default IP address. 000 means it listens on all network interfaces. Without this means that uvicorn would only listen to 127.001, which is invisible outside the container, meaning that it wouldn't be public in our case. So we need to do 0.0.0.0, and then we also need to provide the port in this case, which we'll want to do 8000. 8000 is basically just the port inside the container. So we'll save this. Now, the way that we'll test this is by trying to create a Docker image. So I'll clear my terminal because it glitched again. We're going to do Docker run, which starts a container from the image. We're going to do -port, and we're going to say 8000, 8000. This maps port 8000 on your machine to port 8000 inside the container. The format is the host, which is 8000, to the container port, which was 8000 in this case. Secondly, we need to provide the container name. So we're going to say Kyle example-repo. Now, you'll see that actually failed because I didn't build it. That's on purpose. The source. Now, I honestly forgot. So Docker build reads the Dockerfile and will create the image in this case. We're going to say -t, which means tags name, the image, so you could reference it in this case. So we're going to do Kyle example-repo, and we'll do dot. this means that it'll use the current directory as the build context where Docker looks for the files to copy. So I'll click this, and you'll see it'll start building this. This may take some time depending on how good your system is in this case. Luckily, our project isn't that big, so it shouldn't take that long in our case. You'll see that it built it. Now I'm going to go back to the earlier command that I tried running. I'm going to run it, and you'll see it actually started up the service. So now if I basically go to our service, so I'm going to do this, you'll see that our docs loaded perfectly fine. Or the slash, it loaded up hello world, and you'll see it actually logs it perfectly fine as if it was a server. Now, we can now do Control-C to close the application. Now you can also do Docker space PS in this case, which would basically show you any containers that are active at this time. So in case, let's just say I was running it, I open up a new terminal, I do Docker space PS, and you'll see that that container was specifically running at this ID. What I can do is Docker space stop space paste and stop it right here. You'll see it canceled it and it closed it right here. Now in Docker, you'll see that it started 2 of these, which is perfectly fine. It's because I recreated it each time. Each time you run it, you don't want to keep doing it this way because we've already built it in this case. So in our case, I would delete one and only ever run one of these. I'll teach more in the next video for how we'll actually only ever have one. But this is a great start, guys. Let me know if you have any issues.